Hello and welcome to the GBC Mission Podcast, where we have conversations about faith and where God is at work in the world. My name is Jodine and I'm one of the Associate Pastors here at the GBC Faith Community. And through this video and audio podcast, you'll be hearing about the Bible Society and their work in remote Australia. The Bible Society seeks to provide access to the Bible for all people in a language and format they can understand. Over 3 years, we are partnering to create an oral Bible translation of the Book of Luke in 4 Aboriginal languages spoken in the Kimberley region. This is the first oral Bible translation project for an Indigenous language in Australia. It will also provide the online platforms and listening devices for accessible engagement. And to ensure the ongoing translation of the Bible into Indigenous languages, we're supporting the Diploma of Bible Translation at Noongar College in Darwin. This 3-year government-accredited course is training up the next generation of translators to ensure the future of their language and continued translation work. Today we are joined online by Bible Society representatives Jonathan Harris, who is across church and community relations, and Louise Sherman of Remote Indigenous Ministry Support. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan and Louise, for joining us online today. So Louise, I'll start with you. We see God's mission as the restoration and renewal of all things in Jesus. How does this particular project contribute to that?
Okay, well, being part of Bible Society, our main aim, our main mission is to open the Bible to all people. And one of the central themes of the Bible is reconciliation, is God reconciling himself through Christ. And so being able to provide Bibles to support the translation of Scripture into heart languages is a way in which brings renewal and brings that message, that central theme of reconciliation. An example or analogy for the translation, the process of translation is Untitled, one of our translators, suggested a partnership and the idea that translation is like we're going fishing, and the Yolngu people or the Indigenous people know the land, they know where the fish are, and they can provide that information. And us as non-Indigenous people, we can provide the boat to take them to get the fish. So that's where I see reconciliation in terms of translation and how it works together.
Yeah, and I think we take it for granted that you can read the scriptures in your own language, and we've grown up with that, and that's not the case for so many people, not only here in Australia but around the world.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. How's the COVID-19 situation impacting this project, and how's it actually bringing hope through this time too?
Well, obviously we've been impacted in that communities are now closed, and we can't go out to remote communities. So that has an impact on our workshops and our relationship with translators. But what we're finding, in fact, is that many of our translators, because they're pretty much stuck in community and they don't have the distractions of visitors or the distractions of other things, they're actually eager to translate. So unless they have a sense of urgency with their work because they want to get these translations done. So we're actually finding we're getting phone calls from translators saying, send us more translation work, we want more and more and more. And my team's saying we've never been this busy. So in many ways, while some of the ways we work we can't do anymore, it's opening up other opportunities. I'm getting calls every day from chaplains all over the country wanting more and more Indigenous Bibles. So the demand for it is definitely still there.
Wow. And it's so exciting that it's an oral translation that we're looking towards creating, because that's something that hasn't been so widely available, and it's something that is natural to their culture.
Yes, definitely. So it's very, very exciting.
And Jonathan, I'll ask you, why is this project so unique and why does it matter?
Well, I was very fortunate enough to be able to learn that my grandmother started one of the first Indigenous Bible translations about 80 years ago. And the Gunwingu language arrived basically on a ship. The translation arrived on a ship from Amity Printing Press in mainland China. And I've learned that my grandmother had actually started that in 1936. I then asked the executive, can I deliver this back to the community 18 months ago? And I was amazed to see the impact of people reading Jesus' words in their own heart language and seeing the impact on that. Whereas instead of reading it through the eyes of a second language, English is their second language, I was able to go back a year later to see the impact of this actual translation in their hands. This is in the settlement in Arnhem Land, Northern Territory. And I met with a woman called Paulette, and Paulette invited me to meet with her, and she said she's been reading this translation with her adopted auntie, a Bible translator in Melbourne, right across the country, and she's been reading the Bible with her for 2 years every single day, and she's actually learnt to read her own language. So she's become literate and she's become transformed, and now she just wants to tell everyone about it. So it empowers people, brings them justice, brings them something which is 200 years in the making to really help them have that connection with their own country and their own language.
Wow, so a really powerful story there of how translations in your own language mean so much to people and do so much transformative work.
That's right. And so we're concerned about making sure that we can do, if people in the remote areas and communities really want this, we don't push it on them, but if they really desire this, we'll support and work with all the different people like Wycliffe, Aussil translators to really empower them to be able to help people in those remote areas.
I think that's one of the great things, is that say mutually beneficial partnership that we're working, and you're working with the communities for something that they have chosen to do and want to work through and create themselves with partnership with these other great organisations.
That's right. And Nungalinga College, which you're working with us on, is basically empowering the people too. They have a translation course, and that translation course is able to actually teach many, many more people, because otherwise it takes a long time. My grandmother's translation has only just finished the New Testament after 80 years with 3 Old Testament books. So we need more translators. And so Nungalinga College is doing that.
Yeah, so we're not only getting the translations done, but creating the translators that will foreseeably in the future translate those Bibles.
And providing employment opportunities for them to work within government and also in Bible translation work.
Jonathan, if you could just explain to us, what's the Bible Society's, I guess, theological approach to developing projects? What's your frameworks, and how do you empower your beneficiaries through them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Louise mentioned that with the fact that we're trying to primarily help people to open the Bible and also to be able to afford a Bible, and if they can't afford it, to actually get it to them for free. So pretty much our main priority is to translate, distribute, and then help them engage with the Bible. And whatever that situation is in each country or each project, we're determined to support. Now, because we represent many different denominations, we're interdenominational with the Bible Society, we actually don't really have as such a theological perspective, but we're more an empowering organisation. As far as we're concerned, we're here to really make sure that people can have access to the scriptures. And then when they have access to it, then we actually help them to use it and engage in the local community. But really it is up to the local churches and their theological stance as to how they interpret the Bible. Now, as far as empowerment goes, though, what we do, as I mentioned a little while ago, is the fact that when someone actually has the Bible in their own language, it means that they can actually tell their story, their own people's story, and Jesus' story in their heart language. I'll give you an example of that. I recently had the benefit, the privilege of being able to go through the central APY lands, or the Pitjantjatjara country around Alice Springs, to deliver an audio recording on a solar-powered device. And we're able to give it to the people in areas where there's no Wi-Fi, there's no electricity in some situations, in camps. And when we're delivering, we actually camped on a riverbed one night, and Louise was there with me, and we just sat around the campfire with David Barnett and some of the translators. And I just said to them, look, what are the biggest challenges that you have in getting this message to the people? And they said, well, it really comes down to a lot of the Western concepts or the Middle Eastern concepts are really difficult to translate into the indigenous languages.
Wow.
And I said, can you give me an example? And he said, well, when we sit around the fire, he says, we try to translate the concepts of camels and donkeys and all these things, and kingdoms. I mean, there's no such thing as kingdoms in the indigenous languages. So, and another word he said was glory, like a theological concept such as glory. How do we get that into their language? So rather than actually saying, we think you should call it this, the indigenous people said to David Barnett, they said, well, there's this special word, Pidalichi. And Pidalichi, they said, it's like this, see the hottest coal in the middle of the fire? That hottest coal sounds like, the word we use for that sounds like what you're saying is glory. So now what you'll find is that when the word glory is used in the scriptures, the word Pidalichi, hottest glowing ember of fire, is in their Pitjantjatjara Bible. And I thought that was just wonderful, because it really is empowering them to really identify deeply in their heart as to what resonates the most with their understanding and concept of God, the Creator. And in that way, what we do is we really do empower them, and it becomes a theological exercise, but it's their process, their understanding, and but then it's also fact check. We have translation checks with people who travel to make sure these translations are really close to and adhering to Scripture and translations. But as far as I'm concerned, I see this as one of the most wonderful things that we do.
Wow, what an insightful story. That's incredible. Louise, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess the only thing I have to add to that story is that the translations that we provide, we try and remain as closely as we can with the Scriptures. So we're not, as Jonathan said, we're not about interpreting that. We're about ensuring that the translation is clear, that it's understood by the local speakers, and also that it's the message is consistent and conveyed from the original Greek and Hebrew. So in that, it's interesting, even in the Creole Bible, they talk about whiter than snow. Jesus washes you white as snow. If you're a person or you're living up in the top end, you've never seen snow. So then the decision is made by the translation team, do we create a word in our language that represents snow, or do we take the meaning of that, which is the purity, the whiteness, the washing, the clean, and do we take something that's already there in our culture? And some groups have taken things like white as a particular lily flower that comes and is pure and white. So that's where there's that theological element where it's about conveying the message of the gospel as clearly as we can, and putting that in a cultural context.
Wow.
Yeah.
So simple, but yet so complex.
Yeah.
And again, things we take for granted.
Yeah. And can I say, I have just learned so much from working with the translators that we work with, the Pitjantjatjara people that are traditionally a nomadic people, are people that have a connection with their land. Now translating the Old Testament, and I was with a carload of Pitjantjatjara ladies, and they put By the Rivers of Babylon on, and they were singing this song, and it suddenly dawned on me. I said, oh, this is from the Bible, this is a psalm. And they said, yes. They look, but it struck me there was that profound revelation. I'm in a car with women who are living in Adelaide because of their health issues, but that are away from their own land. And it really struck me, this is about a lament. And so it brought for me new insight into the Scriptures through these women and their culture and their love for Jesus.
Wow. It's amazing to think how much you can learn from, I guess, the Bible and a translation outside of your own culture.
Yes, definitely.
Wow. So we're looking to support this project for 3 years in a partnership, which we're really excited about starting with the Bible Society. What have been, I guess, your observations of these types of projects, how the transformation, I guess, occurs and what that looks like?
Okay, well, one that struck me, we had a lady, a Pitjantjatjara speaker who I was working with, and I picked her up in my car, and I just downloaded the Pitjantjatjara voice recording onto my phone. And so I handed it to this lady, and I knew that she had done the narration for the Gospel of Mark. So I put it onto Mark and I handed it to her, and she was listening to it as we were driving to the church where we were going to do our translation work. And when we got there, I looked over and she had tears streaming down her face. And I said to her, Nami, are you okay? And she said, Ua, which is yes. And then she turned to me and she said, now my children and my grandchildren will be able to hear me telling them stories about Jesus long after I'm gone. And to me, and that was just her little revelation and transformation. And even just the act of translating, of grappling with the Scriptures, and then even with the audio of reading the Scriptures. We had one lady in an audio recording, she suddenly said, stop, I have to stop. And the recordist, who was in the next room, asked, are you all right? And she said, I just had to stop because God was speaking to me through the words I was saying. So we often underestimate the power of the gospel and the power of God's word speaking to us. And so to have it in your language and to be able to read it and speak it out, that's not just an academic exercise, it's a spiritual exercise. And so even as we're translating, as a part of the process, change and transformation is happening, let alone once the translation is out there.
This is one of the first oral translations that's been done in Indigenous language in the Book of Luke. You've mentioned some other recordings have been done. How does this one differ that we're looking at supporting up in the Kimberley region?
Okay, so the project from the Kimberley region is what we call an oral Bible translation process or project, whereas the recordings that I've been talking about with the Pinjara, that was a recording of the scriptures that they had translated. So they had translated, just like Jonathan's grandmother had translated, in a written format, where they'd taken a front translation, an English translation usually, and they'd translated it into their language, and they'd written it down, and then we published it. And then we had a workshop where they recorded those published translations. The oral Bible translation project, which you are supporting, is actually takes away the literacy component of that project, in the sense that it's for people who are strong speakers and know and understand their culture very well, but may not necessarily be very literate, particularly in English or even in their own language. A lot of people can speak their language but may not be able to read it. So an oral Bible translation project sort of bypasses that and creates translation using an oral framework.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how that's done, because I can't get to oral before I have literate, something written down to actually go from. So it's really exciting to be partnering in one of those first kind of translations, because as you mentioned, there are audio translations, but they have the literate sort of text there to go with it. But this is a completely different process. Is there any other insights that are helpful for us to know and understand how this project, functions?
An oral Bible translation project, quite unique in that we've been able to do it now because of software. We have these new software programs that can record the speakers, and then they can listen to it back, and they can hear the front translation, then they can speak the translation, and then they can hear it back and revise it. The other exciting thing is they're telling the story. So rather than writing it down, they're hearing the story in English or whatever the source language is, and then they're telling the story. And when you're talking about an oral storytelling culture, the story is going to come out in the recordings more, dramatically, and also it's going to be, I think, you probably have possibly more impact. So,
wow, that's an incredible process, and something, again, that I guess it makes sense in these days, of COVID-19, when, we're also reliant on technology, things being online. You can see how these platforms and technologies enable just something that not only translates something that's scalable and for future generations, but also works well with cultures that are orally based.
Yes, definitely. And that's right. It's been used overseas, I think, in Africa and Asia, and has been quite successful. So that's why we're wanting to trial it here, and because we have so many Indigenous cultures who, up until recently, many of them haven't been written down at all, just spoken.
Wow. Louise, can you tell us any other stories about how these types of projects impact the people and the communities?
Just trying to think. We've got so many projects. I'm trying to think of, well, I was going to say maybe Jonathan could share a bit about his own experience when he was at the Gunwingu Bible dedication in Gumbalanya in Arnhem Land.
Yeah, I've experienced a couple of things. I went to the Noongalina College's Languages Day. Last year there was a International Mother Tongue Day, and I actually saw people travelling from all over Australia to join in. And when I saw them actually moving, dancing, listening and speaking, there became this incredible sense of community, an incredible sense of we're all in this together. And because there used to be over 300 Indigenous languages before settlement, and to now have only really just over 100 active Indigenous languages. It's a real race to get these recorded. And we're seeing an upswell now in all over the country to get languages revived or saved before they disappear. And so when I first came to the Bible Society 3 years ago, there's some story came through that Louise sent, this is Gunwingu Bible that's arrived from Amity Press, in China, and it's this thing that's been going for 80 years. One of the original translators, Dr. John Harris, no relation, said, that's your grandmother's translation. I couldn't believe it, that this now technology is actually, my grandmother started writing it down with Aboriginal ladies in an exercise book, then they hand typed it, then they took it down on the train down to Sydney, and then they got it printed by the British and Foreign Bible Society in 1942, the year Darwin was bombed, and when she was sent away on furlough, but the other fellows stayed behind, the other missionaries. It arrived up there, but then the work kept on going, but translators kept dying out, and then new ones had to be trained. Then there were health issues in the 60s and 70s, and then they trained up more. So there's been generation after generation passing this down. So I was able to go back up there and to hand over the completed New Testament with called a shorter Bible with 3 or 4 Old Testament books as well. But then to see the impact of the legacy of generation after generation. And then people walked up to me and says, Jonathan, your father's name was Wilfred. Oh, okay, yeah. No, he was my father. He worked with my father as a missionary. He was a Nagajok skin. That means you're Narbaline skin. You're my brother. Come out and meet your family. And I was just gobsmacked. They remembered us, the family that got the Bible to them in their heart language. It's just profound, And then who in the Whitefellow families just to have an Aboriginal walking into a church and said, hey, come, you're part of my family again after 80 years. It's just incredible hospitality, incredible culture. And so with dance interpretation, with singing, and with the word, they can actually now make hymns, Bible studies, and people are traveling in their hundreds from all the outstations to come and see this book as they read God speaking to them in their own language. To be there was just one of the best days of my life, and it was just profound. So when I witness this, I just want to empower more and more Indigenous people to be able to not only translate, but to really be able to pass it down to their generation. And, 3 or 4 generations are still attending the same church up there because of the faith legacy of their grandparents and their grandparents and their belief in Jesus. And that's what I want to see in our church with my kids and their grandkids. So to me, it's a very, very special engagement mission that we're all part of. We're working together with your church.
Wow. How exciting, and what a privilege to be part of that story, unfolding story that's been going on for hundreds of years.
Yep. It's very, very humbling. It's also challenging because it's taking so long that, people can't see the finished job. So I'm actually determined in my lifetime, I'd love to see the Old Testament finished.
Yeah. And I think what you brought up before is just such an interesting thing, because it's one thing to translate, but then have the translators and the people that can keep the language alive. Again, it's something that we don't face because English is the predominant language at this point in time. So we don't have to think about those challenges. And that, I guess, takes me on to my next question. What are the challenges with this project, and also the opportunities moving forward? I'll start with you, Louise.
Okay, well, obviously, as Jonathan mentioned, one of the big challenges is we are very reliant on not our translators, the translators, because they are the custodians of their language, they're the experts in their language. We can't do these projects without them, without their support and without their leadership and ownership. But obviously we have many of our translators are getting older, and we're wanting to encourage the next generation. So that's part of the Nungalinya Diploma of Translation, is to train more translators. But as anything, we need more people, more skilled people that are willing to take up the challenge of translation work.
Mm. And Jonathan, do you want to add to that? What are the opportunities, and also what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, look, as I said, it's taken 80 years just to get to the point where we've got these shorter Bibles. The Gunwingu one my family's involved in is probably the third furthest along. The one that's finished is the Creole. The second one would be Pichinjara, and we're hoping to get that finished in the next 8 years, I think, Louise, isn't that right? And then the Gunwingu, but then there's only 12 full New Testaments in those over 100 languages. And so we really, really need translators to be trained up. But not only translators, translation consultants. A lot of the consultants are now really quite elderly and retired, and are still giving their service in retirement to try and keep the job going. But once they pass away, it's like there's going to be a void there. So we need more and more matured Indigenous and whitefellow Christians who are going to be able to help that process. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, is that the health issues is another thing. We're fighting its health. Like this COVID situation is just, please God, let that not go into those communities, because it would just ravage them. They're still recovering from so many illnesses from settlement from a couple of hundred years ago, and health issues, smoking and alcohol, that what we do is we see a big turnover in people who are involved. And so the legacy, the continuity is really at risk because of health issues. So Indigenous training and also health, and then also overseers, they're the biggest prayer needs we do need right now.
Mm. And so as we partner with the Bible Society and you know, people that are viewing this online interview and joining us, when they partner with the Bible Society through this project, what does that tangibly mean for the people, the beneficiaries who are part of this partnership?
Well, Louise, as far as I'm concerned, the beneficiaries, they're after a relationship from us. They're after a long-term relationship. And my concern is, from what I've heard from the Indigenous people, is when I've gone up to visit, I'm determined to keep going back. I've even said to the Bishop of Darwin in Northern Territory, I said, look, I'd love to be able to work in Indigenous areas. But he said, well, can you just move here? And I said, well, I'm not trained in literacy. And he said, well, just move, just be involved, get a relationship with people. So one of the biggest challenges, and the Aboriginal people said, is that we get the problem of the big white cloud. And what that means is the white fella is like the white cloud that's just blowing through, and they don't come back. So then they get fatigued by saying, you know what, we've explained ourselves and our needs, and we've had to explain our culture to these people over and over again. We never see them again. And so what we want is a long-term relationship in that way.
And I think that's one of the things and reasons that we've moved to a partnership, albeit 3 years to start with. But we want to start to be faithful and committed to things long term, because we see that change that happens when you invest into something, and the compounding effect, and not to be that big white cloud of dust that maybe disappears after a while. That's
right. And as far as I'm concerned, I really hope that we can actually bring the translators and the beneficiaries to visit Gaimea. It would just be incredible to be able to have them come and experience fellowship in the church, to be able to speak, be able to get a relationship with you. I mean, they'd love to be able to travel there. And I think not only that, but to get your team to travel over to visit the projects as well. That would be just wonderful. That would be just wonderful.
Yeah, which is kind of timely in the sense that I don't know if international travel is really going to be a thing in the near future, but, obviously around Australia, in line with government regulations, as things open back up again, that opportunity will grow in the future.
Yeah, but I think it'd be fantastic. Yeah, so we also want to send updates, want to do videos regularly and reporting as to sort of the effect of the investment that the church is putting into the projects. So we'll keep people informed either virtually, but as well as that, to get a relationship long term. I mean, I have dreams. I've been in touch with some of the guys that have been foundational in Kakadu National Park and know a lot of people out in the remote outstations, and they would just love to host visitors to come out and get culture, learn culture. And Nungalina has actually said, look, we're opening up the college for visitors. We could organise special days where the church, some members of the church come up and visit, get to know the translators, get a relationship, which they'll be talking about for the rest of their lives. I think it's going to be an incredible opportunity. So we pray that this opportunity for travel will open up again really soon, of course.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the, opportunity for us as a church to mutually grow in relationship with cultures that are different to our own, but are just so close to us as well, that are part of our history and heritage as a nation, that we're still working out how to reconcile. Louise, I love when you told your stories. I was in a car with a bunch of Pitjantjatjara women. It always seems like something happens then when you're in a car with women. I think I want to go for a drive with a bunch of Pitjantjatjara women and see what.
Well, it's fantastic because they sit there and they sing, and Yeah. And I get so caught up in their conversations. One day I ended up driving, I shouldn't be saying this, but I ended up driving on the wrong side of the road and they were all going, where? Which is like, no. Because I was so engrossed in what I was saying.
Oh, I could imagine. Well, really appreciate both of your time to join us, and we're so looking forward to supporting, partnering and learning not only from the Bible Society but the communities that are doing this incredible work. We just really look forward to seeing how this unfolds over the next.
Thanks so much, Jodine. Your commitment to mission is just fantastic, and we're really inspired by the fact that even through these hard times where you can't even go to work to preach the word, it's like you're still concerned about mission and you're working with us. That just is fantastic. So thank you. Thank you so much for all your work with us and your interest in our mission. We appreciate it.
And your prayers, definitely.
Thank you for joining us today. And if you would like more resources or information on how to donate or partner with us through the Bible Society, here are the details. Go to guymeabaptist.org.au and click on the May Mission Month image on the home page. Here you'll find more information on the projects, links to our extended video and audio podcasts, and how to donate. Donations for May Mission Month are over and above our regular giving, and the last day to donate is the 8th of June. If you need further information or assistance with your donation, email missions@guymeabaptist.org.au or call the GBC office. We thank you for partnering with us and loving our local and global neighbours in these challenging times to see lives changed by Jesus.